Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. This is David. I am so glad you could join me, because tonight's story is one of the most intense and genuinely terrifying accounts I have ever had the privilege of sharing. It's a story about a haunted rental apartment, but it's so much more than that. It is a harrowing, step-by-step chronicle of a family's complete and total descent into a nightmare from which they would never fully awaken. The story has been titled 17 Days of Hell. Those 17 days were the first 17 days a young couple spent in their new home. They were also the last 17 days they would ever spend together. They were 17 agonizing days that would tear a husband from his wife and a child from her mother forever. Our story begins in 2016 in a bustling, working-class neighborhood in Queens, New York. The air thrummed with the constant energy of the city, a symphony of sirens, traffic, and 1,000 lives lived on top of one another. A young man named Michael, his wife Sarah, and their infant daughter were living in a crowded house with Michael's parents and his younger brother, David. Recently, David had also gotten married, and the small, love-filled house now held two families, its walls straining under the pressure. The inevitable tensions between the two sisters-in-law, living in such suffocatingly close quarters, began to create a difficult and stressful environment, the air thick with unspoken resentments. Michael, a good man who loved his family more than anything, saw the strain this was causing, the quiet tears Sarah shed when she thought he wasn't looking. He and Sarah made a noble, selfless decision. They would be the ones to move out, allowing his younger brother and new wife to have the family home to themselves. It was a sacrifice made for the sake of peace, a choice born of love. After a month of relentless searching for a place that was both affordable in the unforgiving New York market and spacious enough for a baby, they finally found what seemed like the perfect apartment, just a few blocks away from their old home. It was their chance for a fresh start, a space of their own, a quiet sanctuary to raise their daughter in peace. But the moment they opened the front door for the first time, an unsettling, deeply strange sight greeted them. The walls of the entire apartment, in every single room, were covered in dozens of yellow paper charms, each one filled with intricate, blood-red calligraphy. They hung like a strange, silent congregation, watching the doorway. The landlady, who was showing them the place, just chuckled, a dismissive, rattling sound. "Oh, that," she said casually, waving a hand. The previous tenants were Chinese. You know how they are with their beliefs and superstitions. Michael, a man who prided himself on being tough and pragmatic, a man who had seen the world and wasn't easily shaken, just laughed. "What is all this superstitious nonsense?" he said to Sarah, shaking his head in amusement. The very first thing he did upon getting the keys was to start tearing the talismans from the walls. His hands, strong and sure, ripped them down with a dismissive arrogance, the dry paper whispering in protest as it fell to the floor. "Honestly, who believes in this stuff anymore?" he commented, surveying his work. "We haven't done anything to harm anyone in their past lives. So why should we be afraid of ghosts?" Looking back now, 5 years later, he says that arrogant, dismissive act fills him with a dread so profound, so absolute, it makes his blood run cold. It was the first, and most fatal, of their mistakes. While Michael was inside, desecrating the silent warnings on the walls, Sarah waited on the street, their infant daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. A few of the neighbors from the adjoining apartments came over, drawn by the sight of the new family. Their faces were etched with what looked like a mixture of pity and grave concern. "You two are the ones moving in here? One of them?" An older woman asked quietly, her eyes darting towards the apartment door. Did you ask about the history of this place before you signed the lease?" When Sarah relayed their ominous warnings to Michael, he just scoffed, his bravado a shield against the creeping unease. "Don't listen to them. he said, trying to reassure her, and perhaps himself. They're just trying to scare us. Honey, when I was in the army at Fort Bragg, I pulled months of guard duty right next to the old stockades, a place where men died violent, miserable deaths. I've been around death. Trust me, there is nothing to be scared of here. But the apartment itself seemed to reject his confidence. The moment Sarah stepped across the threshold carrying their baby, the little girl, who had been perfectly calm just seconds before, began to scream. It wasn't a normal cry for food or comfort. It was a high-pitched, terrified, agonized wail of pure, primal agony. She shrieked and shrieked until her tiny face turned a frightening, mottled shade of blue. She cried for nearly 2 hours straight, a sound that seemed to claw at the very walls of the apartment, only stopping when she finally, mercifully, passed out from sheer exhaustion. That first day, they were too worn out from the move, from the baby's horrifying, screaming fit, to perform the customary cleansing or offering for the spirits of their new home, a tradition Michael knew of but didn't truly believe in. They collapsed into bed, falling into a deep, uneasy sleep, completely unaware that their 17-day ordeal had just begun. Michael woke abruptly at 5 the next morning. The sun wasn't up yet, but he was wide awake, his heart pounding, gripped by a powerful and inexplicable feeling of anxiety. He couldn't get back to sleep, so he decided to go to the local market to buy some fruit and incense to make a proper offering, hoping it would at least calm Sarah's frayed nerves. Back in the apartment, he set up the small offering in the middle of the living room and lit 3 sticks of incense. Immediately, an abnormally thick plume of acrid, choking smoke filled the small space. Far more than 3 sticks should have ever produced. It was so overwhelming, like an entire bundle was burning at once, that he had to take the censer up to the small sleeping loft to let the room air out. His eyes watering. Just 6 or 7 minutes after he left for work, his phone rang. It was Sarah, her voice trembling with a panic that was becoming terrifyingly familiar. "Michael, you won't believe what just happened," she cried. "Right after you left, the 3 incense sticks you lit, they just burst into flames. The whole room lit up like a flare for a second. And then they just went out." Michael, already late and his mind focused on his commute, brushed it off, forcing a rational explanation through his own growing fear. "It's probably just a draft. Honey, don't worry about it. I tell burnout." That afternoon marked the first direct contact. Sarah was napping with their daughter when she was pulled from sleep by a low, raspy voice whispering directly in her ear, so close she could feel the phantom heat of its breath. "Give me my place back." Asterisk, asterisk, it hissed. "Give it back to me now." Asterisk, asterisk. She heard it 3 or 4 times. The words, a venomous, insistent demand. At the exact same moment, the baby woke up screaming again, that same horrifying, agonized wail. Terrified, Sarah grabbed her daughter and fled the apartment, calling Michael and begging him to come home early from his job. Again, he tried to rationalize it, to maintain control. "It must have been the neighbors you heard through the wall," he insisted. But his words sounded hollow and weak, even to himself. From that night on, to appease Sarah, Michael would play a recording of a protective Buddhist chant, the Great Compassion Mantra, on his iPad as they slept. The soft, melodic chanting became a fragile shield against the oppressive silence of the apartment. A few nights later, they were jolted awake by a deafening, violent crash from the tiny kitchen. They rushed out to find every single pot, pan, and utensil that had been hanging on the wall hooks scattered across the floor, as if they had been violently thrown down by an unseen, furious hand. The baby was screaming hysterically. They stayed up the entire night, huddled together, trying to comfort her, the Buddhist chant playing on repeat, a desperate prayer in the dark. Michael's co-worker, seeing his exhaustion and fear, suggested he try making another, more sincere offering. That evening, when he returned from work, he stood in the doorway and spoke to the empty, watchful room. "I know we were late with our offering when we moved in," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I am sorry for any disrespect. If there are any spirits here, I ask that you please accept this and leave my family, especially my child, in peace. She is just a baby." He went up to the loft and lit 3 more incense sticks, praying silently, his heart filled with a fear he could no longer deny. As he turned to walk back down the stairs, he glanced back at the censer. For the second time, the 3 sticks erupted into a brilliant, silent flame, burning with an impossible intensity for a second before instantly extinguishing, leaving not even a wisp of smoke behind. It was not an acceptance. It was a rejection, now genuinely terrified for his family. He knew they had to get out. He and Sarah immediately started searching for a new place. That night, something in the apartment shifted. The attacks became more intimate, more personal. A new, more insidious horror began. Michael was in the kitchen cooking dinner when he called out for Sarah. There was no reply. He turned around and his heart leaped into his throat. She was standing silently right behind him. Her face was a deathly, chalky white, her eyes completely vacant and staring past him, seeing something he couldn't. It was his wife's body, but the person looking out from behind her eyes was a stranger. "Sarah, are you sick? You look so pale," he asked, his voice trembling. She didn't respond, just stood there like a porcelain doll, cold and still. He pleaded with her to join him for dinner, and she finally snapped, her voice flat and cold, completely devoid of the warmth and love he knew. "I said I am not eating," she stated. When he pressed her, her voice became harsh and ugly, a snarl he had never heard before. "I am not eating! What's wrong with you? Why do you keep asking?" It was a tone and a disrespect she had never once shown him in their entire relationship. Later, he found her sitting by herself in the complete, suffocating darkness of the loft. She eventually came down and sat at the table, but she only ate plain white rice, refusing to touch any of the other food, all while staring at him with an unnerving dawn, predatory intensity. On the 13th day, they found a new apartment, but the current tenants wouldn't be out for another 4 days. They just had to survive 4 more nights. That day at work, Michael received a series of silent phone calls from Sarah. He would answer, but there was only dead, empty air on the other end, filled with a cold, sickening sense of dread. He rushed home early. He found her standing outside on the sidewalk, clutching their daughter, her body racked with sobs. "We have to leave now. Michael," she cried, her voice muffled by tears. "If we stay another night, it's going to kill our whole family." Through her tears, she told him that while they were napping, she had been pinned down by sleep paralysis, forced to watch, helpless and screaming on the inside, as a massive black shadow lowered itself onto their sleeping child, pressing down on her tiny chest. That was Michael's breaking point. His fear was eclipsed by a burning, protective rage. He stormed into the apartment. "Whatever you are, you deal with me," he screamed into the empty, malevolent rooms. "You leave my daughter alone! You hear me? If you touch my family again, I swear I'll splash dog's blood all over this room." In a fit of pure, unadulterated fury, he ran up to the loft, grabbed the censer, the object of so much paranormal activity, and threw it with all his might, smashing it into 100 pieces against the wall. As he turned to come back down, he had only taken 2 steps when he felt an invisible, iron-hard force grab his ankles and yank him violently down the stairs. He only saved himself from cracking his head open on the floor below by grabbing the railing at the last second, his shoulder screaming in protest. The 16th night, the night of the scissors, the horror escalated beyond comprehension. He turned from the stove to find Sarah standing behind him again, silent and pale. But this time, she was holding a large pair of sharp scissors, her eyes wide and filled with a terrifying, inhuman hatred. "What do you want?" she hissed in that alien, rasping voice. Michael reacted instantly, tackling her to the ground and wresting the scissors away from her unnaturally strong grip. He grabbed their daughter and retreated to a corner of the room, where he sat all night, holding his child tight, watching the entity that wore his wife's face as it sat silently on the loft, a dark silhouette staring down at them. He didn't sleep for a single second. The next morning, incredibly, Sarah was herself again, with absolutely no memory of the night before. They spent the entire day away from the apartment, a desperate, frantic attempt at normalcy. They went shopping. They laughed. They played with their daughter, a happy family on the very brink of total collapse. Michael prayed, with every fiber of his being, that they could just make it through one more night. That evening, as they prepared for bed, he turned on the iPad to play the protective mantra. A few moments into the chant, the device, which had a full battery, suddenly went black. It wouldn't turn on. It wouldn't charge. It was completely, utterly dead. Their last shield was gone. On the final night, the 17th night, Michael was woken from a deep, exhausted sleep by a series of sharp, stinging slaps to his face. His eyes shot open. Sarah was sitting up in bed, but her mind was clearly somewhere else. She was staring at the wall, her face contorted in a mask of terror and unbridled rage. In her hand, she held a large chef's knife. She was stabbing it violently and repeatedly into the drywall, over and over and over, all while screaming at the top of her lungs, "Leave me alone! Leave my husband alone! Stop tormenting me! Asterisk, asterisk." The raw, agonized screams brought the neighbors running, pounding on their door, terrified that a murder was in progress. Michael, his mind a blur of adrenaline and terror, scooped up his daughter, unlocked the door, and handed her to a neighbor, begging them to keep her safe. He turned back to his wife, but she was no longer attacking the wall. The moment the child was gone, the entity's full, malevolent attention turned to him. Michael would later say that if he hadn't, in a moment of fear days earlier, followed the old folk belief of placing a large knife under his own pillow for protection, he would likely be dead. That night, the entity controlling Sarah found that knife. When Michael turned on the light, he saw his wife, her eyes burning with a black fire, holding the knife, preparing to lunge at him. He managed to restrain her, but the thing inside her gave her an unholy, impossible strength. In the struggle, she managed to stab him twice a deep, bleeding gash in his right arm, and another in his left leg. Despite the pain and the blood, Michael knew he had to protect his daughter. He pushed past Sarah, grabbed their child from the neighbors, and ran out of the building, screaming for someone, anyone, to help him. The neighbors rushed to his aid, taking the baby to safety. But in the chaos and terror of the moment, something else happened. The thing that was his wife, her hair wild, her eyes insane, burst out of the apartment and ran. She sprinted down the dark street and, in the confusion and the panic, she vanished into the Queen's night. That was 5 years ago. Michael says that since that night, neither he nor Sarah's family have seen or heard from her again, despite filing a missing persons report, despite a police investigation, despite their desperate, unending search. It was as if she simply ceased to exist. Michael wanted me to share this story because he wants the world to know it is 100% true. The horror that befell his family was real, and the consequences have been a lifetime of pain and loss. His daughter is growing up without a mother, and he is a man forever haunted by 17 days in a cursed apartment, and the wife he could not save. We can only hope that wherever Sarah is, she has found some measure of peace, and that one day, Michael and his daughter will get the answers they so desperately deserve. And that is where our story ends for tonight. Thank you for listening. Before you go, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Let me know what you thought of this incredible, tragic story in the comments below. We will be waiting for the next stories together.